My good friend Dan Miller says, it is never too late to become the person you knew you could have become.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
Hey, Whitney, get off your heels, boy. Get on your toes. How are you going to make a play? Get on your toes so you can take it to the game when the ball comes. Man, my coach, I can remember him yelling at me when I was in the outfield in a long hot summer day in Michigan when it was a slow baseball game. Baseball games tend to have a slow rhythm to them. And things happen in spurts, but there's a lot of boredom, quietness in between. And it's easy to sit back on your heels and just sort of observe the game as it happens. But if you do that, you're not going to be ready when the ball comes. You're not going to be ready to make the play to make it a great game. Life is that way, and I think that's the whole point of our agile retirement management process is if we want to have the best retirement and life ever, we're going to have to make sure we're on our toes, being intentional about acting on the things we actually have control over, not sitting on our heels, hoping it all works out and people around us make the plays they're supposed to, because we don't have any control over that. So I want to talk about how do we get on our toes when we're working to build a great life, and how do we make this your best year ever? I'm going to do that, plus answer listener questions right after, that all-important disclaimer. So it's funny, someone emailed me the other day saying, man, I'm getting a little bored of that disclaimer. And I get it. You know what? It ain't that exciting saying every time. But that don't mean it ain't important. It doesn't mean it's not important, right? Think of this show as helpful hints in education. We're talking about money. We're talking about sometimes major decisions in your life. Don't take advice from me on that. Not unless you're a client and I know the whole situation. This is helpful hints in education. Before you make those big, important decisions, evaluate it on your own and talk to the people that do know you, your financial advisor, your tax advisor, your legal advisor, because that's not just common sense. It's pretty dang important. Now let's go figure out how to make a great year this year. So here we are in January, and we need to figure out how we're going to make this our best year ever. Now, that sounds dramatic and high-minded, but why would we not want to be intentional about doing that, right? So, talking with Nicole, you know Nicole, you're going to hear her in a little bit. It's interesting because she sees me as I am now. Now, we've known each other for about a year and a half now, and we talk almost every day. And when she hears me talk about the past, she just looks at me like, really? I could never imagine that. Because a lot of times I talk about feeling like I wasn't that great of dad. I wasn't that great of husband. I wasn't that great of advisor. And I just wasn't a happy guy. And I will tell you, being as objective as I can, a lot of that is very true. But she can't imagine that because that is not who I am, what I am now. I feel confident saying that. About 5.5 years ago, I went through a process of upgrading my beliefs and dealing with the past and becoming a better man. And that has made all the difference. I'd say the last 5 years have been amazing. And I'm not talking financial success or anything like that, just in terms of happiness, feeling connected, and feeling like I have a purpose. And it's really put me on my toes. And I think this is an important thing to talk about because as we get older, it's very easy to stay stuck in the past and focus on things that we screwed up, bad things that have happened, and allow those things to define who we are. The stuff just builds up like junk in a closet, and it can easily define the rest of your life. And as you get older, you get the wisdom. That's the good side of things. But you also get a lot of baggage that you slowly need to push behind you. Because I don't care where you are, how low you feel, all you have is today moving forward. And you get to define what that is. So your choice is, do you define it by the roles or the scripts that you've written for yourself? Or do you get to slowly, it doesn't happen overnight, upgrade your beliefs and start working forward? That's an important question. Again, I think that's a lot of what we do with Agile Retirement Management is being intentional and setting actions on those things. That's how you get on your toes in life, and how you get on your toes in terms of retirement and having a life of more freedom. So next week, I'm doing a show on my reading list for 2018 because I want to hear yours, but I want to talk about, real briefly, we won't spend a lot of time on it, probably the number one book that I'm going to work on and digest. And it's by an acquaintance of mine. We've met a few times, a gentleman named Michael Hyatt. And the book is called Your Best Year Ever. Now, I would describe Michael Hyatt as one of the most intentional people I've ever met or I've ever followed. The man thinks very intentionally about how he lives his life. And it can go overboard because we're not all wired like he is. I'm not wired like he is. But I think he is a good role model from an intentional standpoint to think about how we do this. So his book, Your Best Year Ever, just came out, and I have no dog in this hunt other than I'm enjoying it, and I think it's an important book. So I just want to very briefly hit on a couple of the highlights. And I would suggest that you go out and take a look at it. I use his Full Focus Planner, which I think is awesome. That's part of my work on myself to be more intentional on a daily basis. But anyway, I'm going to sum up 5 things that he talks about in the book. The first is what I've already talked about, upgrading your beliefs. And there are 3 kind of limiting beliefs that really drive a lot of our choices and our attitude about things. The first one, he says, is limiting beliefs about the world. It's the economy. It's the market. I can't or we won't because of something around us that is outside of our control. We have beliefs about that. I see that in the political environment all the time. If I can't start that business, the economy is bad. I'll have to wait till it gets better. I can't retire because I'm worried about the markets crashing. That's an example of these limiting beliefs about the world. The other limiting belief is about other people. Well, they're not going to help me. My friends don't really care about me. My spouse isn't on board. Something that we define and make choices for other people without ever addressing it. I see that a lot with spouses rather than bringing up the subjects. And a lot of times people discover, wow, they really do want to go that path. Or they really are thinking in a broader way than I realized. I fall into that trap a lot with my wife, which I work on. And then the last limiting belief is about ourselves. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough to manage my money. I'm never good at making friends. I can't live on less. Things that we tell ourselves. So I think the first step, and Michael Hyatt talks about this, is upgrading our belief systems. We have a choice in what we believe. And I think it's worth examining what those belief systems are so we can decide how and which ones we may want to upgrade. Now, the second thing that I highlight from his book is this idea of completing the past, of looking backwards like I did. And it's almost going through a grieving process. It was for me of, knowing that's who I was, feeling it, and closing out and saying that's not who I am, though. I don't have to be that person. I think closing out the past is a really important step, especially as we get older. And we have this closet full of stuff that have accumulated from experiences and failure. And a lot of times we end up looking and focusing on the bad things rather than all the good things. So once you've worked on upgrading your beliefs and realizing what could be possible and then completing the past, that gives you a really good foundation to start looking at your life right now and doing some triage. So he talks about this area of 7 areas of your life: emotional, physical, marital, parental, social, vocational, avocational, and financial, and grading yourself in each one of those lives. Now, this isn't new to him. There's the Google Wheel of Life. You'll find some examples. But the idea is to find some areas and grade yourself I usually do it from 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst, in each one of those areas to do some triage as to, okay, where are we at right now? And then work through what could you do, not long term, but literally in the next 90 days to take, say, your emotional health from a 6 to a 7, or your physical health from a 4 to a 5. In fact, we've created a worksheet to help you do this. And if you are signed up for 6 Shot Saturday, we'll share this with you where you can complete the wheel, grade yourself in each one of these areas. And then below that, there's a little worksheet where you can write a sentence or two of where you see yourself right now, and then write a sentence on what one thing you could do in that area to take it from where it's at to a slightly better score in the next 90 days. And if you go through this worksheet, then what I would suggest you do is pick 2 or 3 of them to focus on for the next 90 days. So if you are signed up for 6 Shot Saturday, you will get that in hopefully this Saturday's. Our graphic designer's working on getting it complete, but you'll definitely get it if you're signed up for 6 Shot Saturday, and then we'll have it in the Learning Center. So look for that. So once you've done that, this is my suggestion. This is a little bit deviation from the book, but I think, this is definitely part of it is you need to surround yourself with people that support the journey that you're on. Now, I found this in my experience over the last 6 or 7 years because the people that I had in my network were supporting who I was and what I was doing. And as I started to shed a lot of the past and focus on improving myself, creating a great life intentionally, I also had to start surrounding myself with people that had that growth mindset more and more. Now, it doesn't mean I disowned friends or did anything like that. I'm not saying that, but I do have, looking back, almost an entirely new social network. Not that everybody's gone, but I have a lot of new friends that have more of that attitude. And I think that's a key thing if you want to improve from where you're at. Depending on where you're at, of course. There's room for everybody, but you definitely want to make sure you surround yourself that understand, get, and are on a similar journey. And then the last thing that Michael Hyatt talks about, and he talks about so much in this book, and it's very research-based, so there's a lot of data that supports a lot of what he says, is how to set intelligent goals. We talk about the SMART sprint, and we've talked a lot about that, and I talk about that in my book. He has a SMARTER acronym and then goal-setting templates right in the book. So we're going to talk about books next year, but I wanted to talk about this one because a lot of what this book talks about is the basis, the foundation of agile retirement management. And I think it's really important because I don't care if you're 50, if you're 60, or you're 70, you can make this year your best year ever. I know you can because I know people that are doing it. Let's go talk to Nicole now. All right, so in this practical planning segment, I want to invite Nicole, my awesome sidekick, on the show. Nicole, how are you doing?
I am great. How are you?
So I'm curious, how are you going to make this your best year ever? So in my mind, I picture this huge dream board with photos of things that you guys are going to do this year. Is that what you have?
That actually is not what I have. Actually, what I think I'm going to do to make this my best year ever, I think I actually need to let go of some of those kind of things. I have a tendency to get a little invested in the idea of how I want things to be, and then I disappoint myself when I can't live up to it. So I think I need to ratchet back a little. Simplify. That's my year, remember? Simplify.
All right. So we'll see if we can hold you to that. And you might want to pick up that book, Your Best Year Ever, because it has a framework to help you with that, because, you get a little manic on things.
I will take a look at that.
All right. All right. So we have questions, right?
We have quite a few questions.
Now, before we even get to the first question, we have to sort of apologize because we have a pretty good backlog of questions and we're building a system to be better to respond to people. So I guess I need to say, I'm sorry if you haven't got a response because we have a lot of questions, which is awesome, but it means we don't get to them right away.
Well, I'm not sure how old this question is, but this one is from Alicia on Backdoor Roth contributions. She writes in to say, is there a limit to how much money you can put into a backdoor Roth IRA? I see that the contribution limit for the year is $5,500. Is it the same for a backdoor Roth?
So there is no thing called a backdoor Roth. So what you're really doing is you're making, the reason you would do one is because you can't make a contribution to a Roth IRA because you make too much money. So what you do is you make a non-deductible contribution to a traditional IRA, means you already paid tax on that, say $5,500 that you're putting in, and then you immediately convert that to a Roth, which the IRS rules allow, as far as I understand. And then that strategy is called a backdoor Roth. So, you're still limited by what you're allowed to put into an IRA, whether it's deductible or non-deductible. And the thing to be careful with is if you do that and you have other IRA assets out there, the IRS doesn't really acknowledge the fact that you're making this non-deductible contribution and then converting it to a Roth. And because you paid taxes on that $5,500, it's just a swap. If you have other IRA assets out there, they're looking at the entire pie of IRA assets. And if some of those IRA assets are pre-tax, you may actually create a little bit of a tax burden for yourself. So if you do this backdoor strategy, it can be a little problematic if you have other IRA assets out there. Now, one thing I've done when working with clients that are doing this is if they have IRA assets, we see if we can move those into their 401k account, because 401k account balances don't count towards that. So, Alicia, I think that hopefully that clears it up a little bit.
Our next question is from our buddy Mark Miller.
CareerPivot.com.
Yes. He writes it and says, you discussed having cash reserves. I've been moving to short-term bond funds. Do you consider having money in short-term funds as the equivalent of having cash? If not, why?
So, Mark, I think we want to keep it as simple as possible. So in this almost 0% interest rate environment with interest rates supposedly rising, that seems to be the trend. As of now, we're in, finally, some people would say, in a cycle of rising interest rates. It's easy to try to reach for yield, especially when we're sitting on cash. And it goes back to, why are we owning cash, which is an asset? Why are we owning cash in the first place? If it's for upcoming expenses or things that you want to keep very liquid for emergencies, it's probably best not to look at short-term bond funds or other short-term instruments that have an element of risk to it. If it's as part of your bond allocation, then it's really important. So I'll give you some considerations, but let's look at short-term bond funds. I'm going to pick two as an example. I'm not going to share their name, but they're very popular. The first one has, according to Morningstar, a 30-day SEC yield of about 2.5%. That's pretty attractive, right? If a money market or a savings account is paying nothing, you might be eking out some yield there. So that has about a 2.5% yield if you put your money into it. It has a credit rating of A, so fairly decent credit. Nothing, not government bonds, but decent credit. And it has something called a modified duration, which is a weird term that we use in the bond industry, which is basically the average maturity of the bonds in the portfolio. And there's some consideration for the interest that comes off of those bonds in that number. So it means an average duration of about 2.4 years. Okay? So the rule of thumb is if interest rates move by 1%, the value of a bond portfolio should move by the amount of its duration. Again, it's just a rule of thumb. So in this case, if it has a duration of 2.4 years and interest rates go up by 1%, in theory, the value of this bond portfolio would go down by 2.4%. So you use the amount of the duration as the amount that the portfolio might move if interest rates go up or down by 1%. So if you buy this, trying to eke out that 2.5% yield, and we see interest rates go up by 1%, in theory, that entire yield could be wiped out by the amount of the duration, just because the bonds in that portfolio might be a little less valued. Now, here's something interesting about that duration is that duration, or the average maturity of the bonds in the portfolio, this is getting so geeky. I got to work on not getting so geeky, is actually calculated on yield to worst. meaning that if there's a call feature in a bond, so let's say the bond matures in 5 years, but there's a call feature at 2 years, it uses the worst yield. So in a rising interest rate environment, that duration number might actually expand because the odds of that bond getting called back by the issuer is a lot less. So there might actually be more interest rate risk to the value of that portfolio than you realize. So I'm not, Nicole's looking at me right now because I can see her and she's like, okay, you're getting geeky on me. But this is important stuff that, it's easy to say, oh, it's a short-term thing. I can get 2.5% and I'm not really taking much risk. Well, if we have interest rates go up, you could have zero return or even negative return, especially if they go up quickly. So it might not be quite as safe as you think, depending on the purpose of the funds. So let's look at an alternative to a short-term bond fund or bond investment. It could be an online savings account. I think Ally Bank right now, I went to their website and it says like 1.25%. That's not 2.5%, but it's not going to go down in value if interest rates go up. It actually will probably just yield more. So maybe there's a trade-off where you have total protection of your assets, subject to FDIC limits, no interest rate risk, let me say, but you don't get quite as much yield, but you get all that safety. So I think some of the considerations, Mark, is what's the point of having the cash in the first place? So if the purpose is true cash reserves to fund your lifestyle, I probably wouldn't mess with short-term bond funds. If the purpose is part of your investment portfolio, then maybe your time frame is a lot longer, which is the second consideration. If it's part of your portfolio, then it's not cash you're going to need in the next 12 months. The third is, what's the amount of money that we're talking about here? Because, if there aren't enough zeros on the end of it, trying to eke out 1% on could really, from a dollar perspective, be next to nothing and not worth the last consideration, which is how complex do you really want to make this? Oh, Nicole, how do I stop being so geeky?
It's just in you. Embrace it.
Own it. Own it. So the big
own your awesome. That's what you tell me all the time.
Own your awesomeness. And own my awesomeness. So you can consider them, but I wouldn't do it for your real true cash reserves, only if it's part of your portfolio. There's a short answer. That's it. Next one, Nicole.
Our next question is an audio question from Bill.
Awesome. Love audio questions.
Hello, Roger. My name is Bill, calling you from Arizona. I'm a fan and a dedicated listener. I'll keep my question brief, short and sweet, Roger, for brevity's sake. Following up, had a recent couple of podcast episodes on passive investing index funds, and you cited the example in preparing for market corrections of considering what you called side exit funds versus main exit funds, such as the mainstream S&P, cap-weighted 500, et cetera. But I'm not clear exactly what you mean. If you could provide an example or two of these side exit funds that you mentioned. You mentioned you're not a fan of total market. So could you give us an example or two exactly what you mean by these side exit funds, Roger? Thanks for your service. Bye-bye.
Well, hey, Bill from Arizona. Before I even answer your question, I got to Sparty on, buddy, because you say you're a fellow Spartan. I appreciate that. And you say you're someone in your 50s, early retiree, and you're an old bald guy. Well, first off, if you're in your 50s, you're not old, because that would make me so old. I'm not an old retiree. Nicole just dropped her microphone. And I am sort of a bald guy. Are you okay over there?
It fell over on me. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry about that, Bill. Anyway, so when you mentioned side exit, I'm like, what is Bill talking about? I don't know what a side exit is. And so we traded some emails and I went back and listened because you told me it was on episode 189 and we were talking about the proliferation of passive investing using traditional indices like the S&P 500. And I did use the word side exit, which I shouldn't have because it doesn't really mean anything. My point in that episode was, Bill, that the volume of investment assets going into vehicles based on a very small set of indices like the S&P 500 mean that when that trend reverses, and usually that will happen in periods of stress, it's like everybody running in the same door and running out of the same door. It can create or exasperate the moves or the volatility that you might see. And my point was that passive investing, the attraction to passive investing has less to do with say, the S&P 500 as the basis, and more to do with the efficiencies related to the fees charged. So there are investment vehicles out there that have virtually all the attributes of a passive investment, meaning that they are extremely well diversified. They are tax efficient relative to most active investment management vehicles, and they have much lower than average fees that aren't mimicking, say, the S&P 500, which is where everybody is going. So you can get the attractiveness of better tax efficiency, broad diversification, low fees in things that aren't being potentially run up by where all the money seems to be going. So in our practice, we use dimensional fund advisors for parts of our portfolio that build their own, they hate it when I say it, their own indices or their own more passive ways that have exposure to things that aren't necessarily in all these popular indexes. So that's the point I was trying to make in terms of, I guess, side exit, in that it's usually not a good idea to be in the crowd when all the crowd is going one direction, because if history repeats itself, usually that crowd goes the other direction too under times of stress. So hopefully that clarifies that. You can go back and listen to episode 189 with that as context, and that might help you. So with that, I think it's a good time, Nicole, if you picked up your microphone, to go get happy.
I'm ready. Welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how to live a happier life.
So some of the most unhappy times of my life, Nicole, have been when I feel like I'm on my heels.
On your heels? What do you mean by that?
Meaning that I don't have any forward momentum. I don't know where I want to go, and I don't know what to do. I'm just on my heels in life, right? I'm just sort of leaning backwards, and it's really uncomfortable. And I've seen that in my daughter when she's trying to figure out careers, or kids. And I see it in clients when they feel stuck for some reason. And what's interesting is, and I've experienced this, is when I start working towards something, and it's almost anything. This is maybe one reason why I've done adventure races and marathons and things like that, because as soon as I get something set in the future, now I start leaning forward and I'm on my toes, moving towards it. And I think time and time again, obviously adventure races, those give you something to work towards. But in life, I think we need that too. I think we always need something to look forward to that is meaningful to us. And that can get lost in retirement when, it's not the next conference, it's not the next, project you're working on. It's important I think we're wired for this as humans. To be happy is to have something we're always working towards. It doesn't have to be work, but I think that, in my experience and working with people, that can make the difference in the quality of your life. So I think you need to make sure that you're always working towards something so you can stay on your toes.
I like it.
You like that? Okay, let's go set a sprint about that and figure out how do we get off our heels and how do we decide what that is that we're going to work towards.
On your marks, get set.
Bam, we're off. I love the segue music for the Smart Sprint, by the way. It just
makes you feel motivated, right?
It does. The gun going off at the line. So in the Smart Sprint segment, we set a 7-day goal for you to take a little baby step to creating a great life and a great retirement. And this is an important one. This may be the most important Smart Sprint of the year. Is that overhyping, Nicole?
No, okay. This is going to be their best year ever. So it's clearly an important.
That's what I'm talking about. So in the next 7 days, I want you to complete a worksheet that we're going to have for you in 6 Shot Saturday. Our graphic designer, Monkey Dog, is working hard to make sure we have it ready for this week's 6 Shot Saturday. If not, just small disclaimer, we'll make sure we have it in the next one. And you're only going to get this worksheet if you are signed up for 6 Shot Saturday. So go to rogerwhitney.com and sign up. But anyway, when you have the worksheet, it's going to be this wheel of life that we talked about, where there are 10 or 12 categories in your life, whether it's fitness, family, money, professional, that you're going to rate yourself from 1 to 10 on every single category on that wheel. And then below, you're going to identify the one thing you can do in each one of those categories to move it, say, from a 6 to a 7 in the next 90 days. So you're going to do that for each one of them. But then here's where the magic comes. You're going to choose 2 of them that you're going to focus on for the next 90 days. Once you have those defined, now you can start to go from your heels and move to your toes to take action to create change in your life and make this your best year ever and create a great life. So get that worksheet in 6 Shot Saturday, complete it, and I would love to hear what you're working on.
After you complete the worksheet, if one of the areas that you're looking to improve in 2018 is your financial life, we are accepting clients right now, and we would love to talk to you. Go to rogerwhitney.com, click on Work With Us, and I will schedule some time for you to visit with Roger.
Until next week, this is the Retirement Answer Man and sidekick,
Nicole. Have a good one.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.